Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning for our virtual keynote, Building Bridges from Alabama's Past to Future, featuring leader Anthony Daniels and moderating the discussion, Miss Kimberly Freeman, who is a Pacific Council member and was actually the lead delegate on our delegation to Alabama in March, where we spoke with leader Daniels, and he was able to provide insight to a delegation of about 20 of our members. So I just want to give a few technical reminders here, and then I'll pass it over to Kimberly. For Q&A, if you would like to ask a question at any point throughout, please go down to the bottom. You'll see chat, participants, Q&A. Use the Q&A button to type in your question, and we'll save those questions for the last 20 minutes of the conversation. But you can go ahead and type it in at any time during the call. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kimberly now, and enjoy the webcast.
Thank you, Mariah, and thank you, Leader Daniels, for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation with you this morning. I'd like to call this teleconference to order, and once again, welcome all of the participants, as well as our special guest, Representative Anthony Daniels. On behalf of Pacific Council on International Policy, it's my pleasure and distinct honor to have this conversation with you today, following our trip to Montgomery in March, where we learned a lot about the site of both struggles and triumphs in our nation's history. And I think I shared with you that Alabama is literally the land of my ancestors, so I'm always curious to hear more about what leaders like you are doing to move the state forward and improve the quality of life for your residents. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I organized the questions along some themes based on your comments when we were visiting with you in the state capitol. So when we met in March, you shared with our delegation that you feel that Alabama's past haunts Alabama's future. And so that discussion, to me, was a great way of using that discussion to create this title for Building Bridges for Alabama's Past to Future. And I just wonder if you, as a native son, could tell us what bridges you're building and what bridges are needed to walk on in Alabama today on the basis of Alabama's past.
First of all, I'd like to really thank the Pacific Council for having me. Thank you, Mariah, for your leadership. And Kimberly, thank you for what you do. But, you know, there are some things that we've been working on for some time. Building credibility among all of the different people, making certain that individuals with means understand how to help those without. But in helping them is bringing them to the table. Oftentimes when we're making decisions for communities, whether it's communities of color or poor communities in general, they are typically on the table instead of being at the table. And so getting my colleagues to see the importance of bringing those individuals to the table to be a part of the discussion, and those of us that have a background that's similar to those individuals that are growing up in poverty also become a voice at the table as well. And so, you know, really educating the public and educating those leaders that are making decisions on behalf of communities, all communities throughout the state of Alabama, is really educating them and helping them see things differently than, and challenging them to think beyond their own household. You know, because if you grew up in a upper middle class household, it's very difficult for you to understand how those individuals that are impoverished, how they live, and what we could do, what policies that we can bring about to really help them help themselves, instead of this notion that, you know, people are sitting around wanting to be poor, or they're not doing anything to grab themselves up by their own bootstraps. But we've heard it said before, if they don't have any boots or scraps to pull themselves up by, then how do we expect them to do it? And so it's up to us as leaders and lawmakers to be that voice and really helping communities help themselves. And so building relationship across the aisle is one of the ways in which that I believe has been very effective and ways to really address poverty and generational poverty. And I think, and with this COVID-19 pandemic, as bad and terrible as it is, I think we're beginning to see the light being shined on a lot of the problems that we knew that existed, but it has really opened the eyes of those that are in leadership at what level this is really impacting those communities and communities in general.
Well, thank you. And certainly all of the things that you just referenced in your opening remarks will come up again throughout our discussion. I'm curious, when you talk about building relationships or bridges across the aisles, you talked about a group that you founded called Alabama United. So as a pro-growth Democrat with an eye on international relations, how does that group work to engage with different stakeholders in Alabama to build Alabama's economy and prosperity?
Well, I will say that, the governor, I sat down with the governor after the incident that has been referenced on national news, where the blackface incident. And so I sat down with the governor because I didn't know the governor to, something that happened in her past. I can understand that, but it is her actions as we move forward and her actions of today that I've been judging her on. And so we sat down. She called me and we sat down and we had some rich discussions and real frank discussions about healing and what things that I felt are offensive. I mentioned to her, when we talk about Confederate monuments, how I feel about that, how my community feel about that. And so in really having that conversation with her and making a recommendation, the birth of Alabama United. And Alabama United right now is working in all different areas. And so what you have is individuals that are in high level positions that are African American. You have the president and CEO of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama, who is an African American who grew up in a rural community. So he grew up in poverty. We have individuals like Beth Martin, who's the bank president here at Progress Bank in North Alabama. We have educators like Representative Laura Hall, who's a lifelong educator and science teacher who grew up in South Carolina. Or you have individuals in other places that are really leading in their industries and bringing all of them to the table to have conversations about generational poverty and economics. How do we help small businesses? What is that, when a small business in communities of color having a limited access to capital, what does that mean for that community? Why is there a barrier for them getting access to capital? Why is the education system continuing to be the same, where you can pinpoint a direct correlation between education, the lack of education, and the prison pipeline? How do we, eliminate or reduce generational poverty? How do we provide more opportunities in communities as it relates to education? And why it's important to invest more in early childhood education, knowing that every dollar that's spent in early childhood saves $7 in corrections. And so having this group of individuals across the state of Alabama work in committees in the different sections that I mentioned. And also we've been having conversations about Alabama's image in the midst of all of this. And so having those individuals that are on the front line, that are in those sectors that grew up in poverty, that's now doing well, and having them at the table because of the resources that they have access to gives us an opportunity to make recommendations to the governor so that it can be impactful to our communities, especially communities of color. And so Alabama United is really driving the train as it relates to making recommendations and to the governor in all of the different sectors, and helping the governor understand from a community perspective. Oftentimes you have elected leaders that are in position, but they are advocating for their small communities. But in many instances, they've not had the exposure that a lot of these individuals that are leading these industries have had, or have access to the resources and the research that they have access to. And so it was better to have a mix of policymakers understanding how to eradicate today's poverty, and how to provide a pathway for our communities to be able to get out of poverty and help themselves, to these particular leaders are just making these recommendations, and they're meeting religiously to talk about this on a bi-weekly basis. And so we're seeing recommendations that the governor is going to take and start making moves to implement. And so we're excited about Alabama United and it being used as a vehicle. And we hope that Alabama United will eventually become a think tank, policy think tank that provides policy to future governors and legislatures on ways to really, may have an impact in communities of color.
That's wonderful. And so I want to go back to what you said about the COVID crisis and the fact that it's disproportionately affecting people in our communities. So what are some of the things that, as a state leader, you and others are doing to attack this pandemic?
So I'll take it from a couple of different perspectives. And so one of the things that we did, I think it was the week after the state kind of started shutting things down, or we had our first case, the week after we had our first case, and we started seeing the proposals at the federal level that dealt with the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL loan to help small businesses. So what we did was we knew right off the top that many of our companies, small businesses, would not have access to this capital. And those that did have access, we had to teach them about how do you get access? Because, when a barber is in their community cutting hair and running their small business, they don't have a lobbyist in Montgomery advocating for their industry. All right. And so what we did was we started convening weekly webinars, educating those that may have been 1099, those individuals that are, don't necessarily have the back office support staff like an accountant or bookkeepers, and those type of individuals, help them understand how to get access to the capital, what banks are lending or providing loans, what the process is, what paperwork they had to have in place before going there. What is a banking relationship? In many instances in our communities, the thought is a banking relationship is really knowing the teller by first name basis. Well, we had to explain to them that's not a real banking relationship. And so really educating the community on what a real banking relationship is and which banks are actually offering support and opportunities, but also preparing them for that. Same thing we did with our churches. We educated them on the process. I did a PSA to educate the community on why it's important to shelter in place and why it's important to wear masks, why it's important to wash your hands regularly. So we did some PSAs that we sent out to different communities around the state of Alabama, and we ran digital ads to educate the community and radio ads to educate our community on the importance of staying in. In April, I sounded the alarm when I saw the numbers. I'm a part of the task force. When I saw the numbers that had at, I think it was April 2nd, the numbers that I received was that African Americans were 60% of the confirmed deaths in Alabama as a result of COVID-19, but they're only 26.6% of the state's population. And so when I started sounding the alarm, communities like the African American community started paying close attention because no one had revealed any of those numbers, because there were these rumors out there that no one is African Americans can't get this virus. They can't. And so all of these myths and rumors out there, you had to guard against, and you had to make certain that you educate the public. So those are some of the things that we've done. And we continue to educate them on what qualifies small towns and cities and businesses for even the relief funding from the CARES Act from a state perspective, and making certain that their voices are heard, pushing for more testing. We were able to get more testing done through the different churches throughout our communities to make certain that our people were taking it serious, but they were getting tested so that they actually knew whether or not they had the virus. Those that were symptomatic were the first round of tests, and right now we're looking at those individuals that are returning to work that may be afraid. We're pushing now antibodies testing and more testing for those that are going back to work. And so doing those type of things are the things that we've been doing to really educate the community, inform the community, and help the community take advantage of the opportunities.
Well, you've mentioned the word education several times, and I think education is key. You have a strong background in K-12 education. Talk a little bit about how your work as both a teacher and somebody working on the Hill in DC has prepared you for the type of policy work you're doing now in the state of Alabama.
Well, in the state of Alabama, I will say that I credit my teaching third grade as the prerequisite to being in the legislature, because you're dealing with a lot of people with a lot of different personalities and interests, and you're just trying to get everyone moving in the same direction. And so I compare it to teaching. Third grade prepared me well for politics. But I will say that before getting started my teaching background, I was an officer with the National Education Association. I was an elected leader for the NEA student program, where I was the chairman for the NEA student program, where I started championing issues like college access and affordability. But as a classroom teacher, as you mentioned, teaching on an Indian reservation where there are dirt roads and outhouses and extreme poverty, or teaching in a Title I school where there's extreme poverty in an urban setting, and teaching at a public magnet school. Although there were three unique experiences, I think there's certainly commonalities. And so for me, being a voice for all children that attend public schools in our state has been something that has been valued by my colleagues and those that are in the profession right now, as for me to be their voice. And so I really focus a lot of my attention on early childhood education. Really, it was pre-K, starting at pre-K, but right now my attention is on cradle to pre-K. I think that if in fact we get it right at that level, we will certainly see the achievement gaps shrink tremendously. It's not going to eliminate it because there are other factors that play into that. But really been an advocate for early childhood education and cradle to pre-K, especially in communities of color and in impoverished communities. Oftentimes you have these leaders that are in government positions like myself that talk about what a wonderful job we're doing and having the best first class pre-K program in the country. But we're the best because we're only giving access to those that have the means. And so now I'm very proud that Secretary Ross, who is the Secretary of Early Childhood, is focusing attention on impoverished communities. And so that the unserved is where my interest is. How do we get resources to the unserved? Whether it's broadband, bridging the digital divide and broadband, so that such a time as this COVID-19 crisis, there are communities that are left behind even today, and the same communities continue to get left behind. They're the last community to get the resources, okay, no matter what it is. And right now, we're seeing that with the digital divide, is we've been exposed to poverty in some of these communities where our young people don't have the computer or access to broadband to be able to see and learn virtually. And so those are some of the things the difficulties that we're dealing with right now. And I expect the achievement gap to even widen even more once our children, whenever we return to some normalcy.
Yes, that's certainly disturbing. I would like to ask you about the infant mortality rate, because that was also something you mentioned. And when you said that you're focused on cradle to pre-K, it seems that there's opportunities there with the infant mortality rate in Alabama. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the infant mortality rate in Alabama, we have, I think, now the 4th highest infant mortality rate in the country. Part of it is due to in Alabama, we have 17 hospitals that have closed in the last 10 years. And many of those hospitals, at least 9 of them, are in rural communities. And what we begin to understand is that 90% of rural hospitals are operating in the red. 90%. And so what we have to look at is the access issue, right? 43% of Alabama counties don't have an OBGYN in those counties out of the 67 counties. And so the infant mortality rate, especially among women of color, which in many instances are in those communities that are without access. And so what we're looking at doing is providing more incentives for individuals to go into these rural communities. We've just focused more of our attention on telemedicine. It's something that we're placing a huge emphasis on right now. And we're starting to get both the insurance companies on board with that. And then we're beginning to see a breakdown in our healthcare infrastructure. And so COVID-19 has been something and been horrible for our state and our country, but it's shining a light on things that have been hidden for some time. And one of those things is access to an OBGYN or primary care physician in those communities so that we improve the quality of care and the access. And I think once you do that, it's been proven over and over again that will reduce the infant mortality rate. And you'll be able to focus on more prenatal care as we should have been doing for some time.
Well, I share your comment that the pandemic certainly has shined a spotlight on some of these disparities in our economy. And I think it was author Arundhati Roy who said the pandemic is a portal. I want to shift now to why a group like Pacific Council on International Policy would spend time in Montgomery and Selma looking at domestic policy issues. What are your thoughts around the importance of marrying Alabama's legacy with some international policy going forward?
Well, Alabama has been the, I guess, ground zero to a lot of bad policies where Alabama's kind of been the testing ground for a lot of bad policies before they go, and extreme policies before they go to other places. But the level of poverty in Alabama is unconscionable, and it certainly can be compared to that of other countries. Countries that, places like Alabama that decided not to expand Medicaid, which denied 97,000 Alabamians access to healthcare. And so, in looking at that and really looking at the breakdown in our healthcare infrastructure, it is similar to that of a third world country. And so I think the marrying of these policies, we have to have people out there advocating for access to, sometimes it's just quality drinking water or good sewage. If you visited Lowndes County, Alabama, they are the ones that have been highlighted internationally of the hookworms being in the septic tank issues that exist there that I think Brian Stevenson and his organizations has shined a bright light on. And so you see the level of poverty. In fact, Alabama is probably compared to third world countries as it relates to poverty in our state. But we're so dependent on the federal government, but in many instances, we are speaking out against support for the federal government, and it's really just interesting to me. But having an organization, your organization, be a part of, be advocates for what's going on in Alabama, and showing that Alabama in 1965, you can very well make the argument that Alabama of 2020 mirrors that of 1965.
Oh, that's sobering. I want to ask some more questions in this thread. Before I do that, I've been reminded to share with the audience that if you have questions, please put them in the chat box so that when we open it up for Q&A, I will be able to read from the questions that you have submitted. So I don't know if you had a chance to read the essay that was co-authored by two of Los Angeles's most influential civic leaders, Jerrold Green, who is the CEO of Pacific Council, and Ambassador Michael Lawson, who is currently the head of the Los Angeles Urban League, but has been a distinguished attorney and public servant here in Los Angeles. They co-authored a piece on racism and how the history of race relations is a study of international interaction and shame. So again, just trying to probe further on the connection between a group like Pacific Council and a visit to a city like Montgomery. Do you have more thoughts around the international dimension of a city like Montgomery?
Well, of course, Montgomery is widely known around the world because it is sort of the birthplace of the civil rights movement. You think about the role that Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King played, whether it's the Selma to Montgomery March, or whether it's the Montgomery bus boycott. I think that around the country, around the world, individuals are familiar with the issues that happen right here on our soil. And so you're beginning to see, you've seen this reflected in other places, but it certainly has an international impact, and something that I think that in a lot of countries where there are dictatorships, I think that you're beginning to see some, not necessarily, it's more of a class war than it is racial. And I think that you can marry the two, racial and also class, and you'll see the same results. And so you've seen in Alabama. And so I think that is extremely important to continue to educate the world about our past, and that our future is not that much different from our past. And for me, I do think that there are some really great leaders that want to do the right thing. But this political climate has put us back 20 years. I never thought in my lifetime that I would see the level of divisiveness among race and socioeconomic levels that I see today that exist within my state and also around the country. In many instances, those individuals that are, but I would say that class warfare, the class piece of this is not as strong as it was before. I think that people have a conscience, and they're seeing that wrong is wrong, is right, and they want to see people do well, but they're not figuring out how to get us to that point. And so, just to clarify my earlier point, but I think that there is a marriage between the two, and there's certainly a lot of things that exist between the two that we're beginning to see playing out today. And so I think that as long as we are able to get our story told across, not just domestically but internationally, I think that you'll see more interest in people. I believe that you'll see more interest in people from other places to want to come in and help Alabama, like we're helping a lot of the international community in places where there are extreme poverty and the lack of health care and other things. And so that's no different than where we are here in Alabama in some places.
Wow. Well, I was just remembering the time in March when we visited Selma and Montgomery and thinking how brilliantly the story was being told by the likes of Brian Stevenson and yourself and others who represent a new generation of leaders in the state. So do you see the telling of Alabama's story and the tourism and travel aspect of visiting Montgomery as being part of the recovery?
I do. I absolutely do. I think that you have such a phenomenal talent in individuals like Brian Stevenson, but you also have leaders that's stepping forward now, that's running for office, that were at one point the activists on the ground, and someone that often told the story and remarks and volunteered and had nonprofit organizations or what have you. Those individuals that were doing the work on the advocacy side and the activism side, but now they're elected leaders, and so they're in position, whether it's Mayor Woodfin in Birmingham or Mayor Stephen Reed in Montgomery, or whether it's Mayor Ragland, young mayor in Talladega. And so you're starting to see these leaders and activists coming off the sidelines and getting in the game. And so that's exciting to see. And I think that those are the type of things that's going to transform Alabama. And you see more leaders around the state of Alabama that's becoming, and individuals moving back to Alabama to take their, to really make their voices heard and starting their companies in Alabama, because it's easy to leave Alabama and run away from the issues and the problems that are generational, but it's really tough, and is really speaks volumes of individuals that either come back to Alabama and share and teach and share what they've learned and make Alabama better from within, than to just leave Alabama and not come back. And so I think that that's a really good point. And I think that for those individuals that are business owners out there that are own companies, consider the only way to change Alabama is to start bringing more people in with like minds that want to change Alabama. And I think that at that particular point, you'll start to see the demographic shift. And we're seeing it shift here in North Alabama. North Alabama in 2012 was probably 36%, Madison County especially, 36% Democrat. And now in the last governor's race is 48%. And so you're starting to see a lot of the industries that are moving in here, they're bringing families from other places. And so we're able to really have a dual voice. No one wants one party rule does not help, and one voice doesn't really help provide any type of balance or checks and balances to this democracy. And so I think that we're beginning to see that shift happen. And so we just want to keep telling the Alabama story, and get more folks like yourself and others interested in coming to Alabama and learning more about Alabama from within, instead of what you're reading, in a book or seeing from afar.
Well, that's a great segue to some of, to some of the work you've been doing around voter suppression and getting more voters participating in elections. So do you want to talk about that right now?
Yes, absolutely. In 2017, there were, during the special election for the U.S. Senate, there were 396,000 African Americans that turned out to vote in that special election. Out of the 827,000 registered African Americans. In 2018, you saw 441,000 African Americans, an increase in turnout, which got us up to about 53.6% of African American turnout. What you have is these barriers, especially in light of this pandemic. For a person to be able to have access to an absentee ballot, you have to first send your ID, photo ID, to get a ballot to be sent to you. Then you have to make a copy, front and back, of your photo ID to send back with your ballot in order for your vote to be counted. And so there are a lot of barriers out there that limits that. Now, there's a caveat that said if you expect to be out of town. But what if you are not out of town and somebody can prove that, and you're not out of town if you want to be technical about it, on election day? Then we've seen in the past where individuals have been prosecuted over absentee ballots. And so I think that we have to focus a lot more of our attention on finding ways to make it easier for individuals to vote. But when you're not, when the other side is in a supermajority, it is very difficult for you to be able to have a voice in that process. And so that's why we believe that more people that have access to the voting booth, it'll create a balance for our state. And the other part of this is the gerrymandering of districts. We have in our state law, our constitution, the protections for county boundaries. But in some counties that have a less than 45,000 people may have 3 to 4 people representing them when each district is made up of 45,000 people. And so the gerrymandering based upon partisanship is extreme in Alabama more than anywhere else I've seen in the country. And we've seen examples, it was the Shelby case, Shelby Holder case versus Holder case that really, script the Voting Rights Act. And so we're beginning to see, and that's Shelby County, Alabama. And so you're beginning to see a lot of these court cases that further suppresses one's right to vote and ability to vote. We also have where a bill that we passed several years ago dealing with moral turpitude. And those individuals, so we had 118 laws on the books or crimes on the books that prohibit a person from being able to register to vote. And now it's down to 40 something crimes of moral turpitude. And so a theft of property of $500 or more puts you at a situation where you can't even have your rights restored. And so there are still things that are out there, but we're unable to change that when there's a one-party rule. And so what we have to do is we have to register more voters, and we have to, those individuals that are registered, we have to engage them and get them and turn them out. And that's something that we're focusing our attention on, especially for the upcoming U.S. Senate race in November, that we want to keep our friend and colleague, Senator Doug Jones in office. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is we have to turn out rare and sporadic voters, people that don't vote in every election. And in the African-American community, that's about 500,000 people.
So I want to close now with my questions and open the floor to others. I have one more question, then we're going to open the floor to others. So I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please start populating the chat so I can read those questions and make sure that we get them answered before we end this session. But my final question to you would be, what do you hope your legacy will be when you leave office? What do you want to be known for?
Well, I want to be known for the voice of reason, someone that given the legislature a conscience. As someone that grew up in extreme poverty and who values education, who has not lost a common touch, I am more interested in helping people help themselves and creating a system that's going to eliminate or eradicate poverty long term. In a community like mine, where the high school dropout rate has, the approach among African American males approached 50+%. But giving all of those young people, when I go back to my community and I see a young person, I see who I used to be, and I want them to see who they can be. And I want every child, no matter their color or their skin in Alabama, to see that your past and your background doesn't determine where you're going. And if someone like me, who was a little snotty-nosed kid from Union Springs, Alabama, was able to make it out of my community, but also give back to the rest of the world, even at my age, I just hope that my legacy is that I didn't just make the changes for the sake of making the changes, that I've transformed a system to being fair for every person.
Awesome. Well, I should have mentioned at the start that you are, I believe, the first or the youngest minority leader in the Alabama State Legislature's modern history.
Yes, first African-American minority leader and the youngest, yes, that's correct.
That's correct. That's very important to note in your biography when anyone is introducing you. So apologies for not stating that up front. And
you're good.
Congratulations. Okay, it looks like our chat is starting to get active, so I'm going to just toggle over here and open up some of these questions. What leadership and assistance is Alabama receiving from the White House and the U.S. Congress?
Well, the first question, leadership, you know, the rules are changing each and every day. And so it's more, I don't necessarily think that there's been any real leadership provided at the federal level from the White House. But I think that from our U.S. Senator, Doug Jones and Senator Richard Shelby, I think appropriation wise, we're getting a lot of resources. And so now we have to figure out, you know, how we're going to spend those to really get the best bang for our buck, but also help those individuals that are most vulnerable. Because you have a lot of small businesses. We're one of the last states to implement a shelter-in-place order and one of the first states to come out of that order. And so what we're beginning to see is an increase in the number of individuals that have COVID-19. We're in a state with about 4.9 million people. And right now we're at over 538 deaths today. But I think that the numbers are higher because we got our first case on like March 17th, somewhere around there. But we have not gone back to see those individuals that have died in a lot of different places that have not been tested. So if you've not had a positive test, you're not counted in the death rate. And there's no autopsy report to determine your cause of death. There've not been one requested. And so I think that for me, I've not seen very much leadership from the White House. And I think Congresswoman Sewell, who's in the 7th Congressional District in Alabama, she's done a phenomenal job with keeping her district and constituents educated on the issues, but I've seen very little town halls outside of Senator Jones and Congresswoman Sewell and the town halls and weekly meetings that we're doing that's open to the public from anyone. And I think the governor is we're going to be sending some recommendations to the governor on how to deal with how to help small businesses, especially those that didn't qualify for the PPP funding or the EIDL loan from the SBA, so that we can kind of help those companies transition into the new way of doing business in this new normal.
Fantastic. Another question from our audience: how has memorializing racial injustice in Alabama, for example, the Legacy Museum, impacted its communities and the state's ability to address its history? And then a follow-up question: and what impact do you think memorials like this have on the potential for national and international progress on racism?
I think that, certainly economically, the memorial has done wonders for the city of Montgomery. And I think that with the leadership of the new mayor of Montgomery, he will embrace the museum and the memorial more at a grander level than his predecessor. And I think that he will start building and developing around the idea of this memorial. I think that there's going to be another memorial, from my understanding, in Birmingham that speaks to the life and legacy of Frank Johnson, who was involved in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And so I think that that you'll start to see the memorials will really help shine a light on the things that, and also force Alabama to acknowledge the things that have happened in the past, but it's how we move from that that's going to determine how things play out in the end. And I think that we have the leadership right now at all levels, and the governor's office is starting to really embrace this, because at the end of the day, every person is going to be judged based upon what they did while they were in position. And I think that seeing leaders like our governor, I don't think that she want her legacy to be anything. I don't think she want to be remembered as the mistake that she made when she was in college, that she acknowledged, but what she's doing today, and as in the role, in the position that she's in today, and how that's going to impact her legacy for generations from now, and how she will be remembered. And I think internationally, you'll begin to see the museum in Birmingham, I think, is going to have more of an international presence as well.
Fantastic. Okay, I see a question from Carol Wagner Vallanos. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. And she is a member of PCIP. Her question is, given that it is unlikely you will be able to change the method for absentee ballots, what are your plans for getting out the vote, those 500,000 people you mentioned?
And so right now, a lot of my efforts are spent fundraising to help support this initiative. And so what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to make certain that every 18-year-old and every college student that's enrolled in the fall get a registration form. We want to have someone that's an accountability manager that follows up with every person that receives that form. We want to do some digital targeting of the same universe of individuals that are not registered. And we want to send out 3 rounds of social pressure mail pieces to those rare and sporadic voters, and utilize congregations, church congregations, to call into local communities, which I call relational organizing, where people that know you from within your own community is calling you about voting and the importance of voting, and engaging barbershops and beauty salons and other organizations in the process who have the direct contact with these individuals. And so the phone banking piece, the text messaging follow-up and follow-through piece, the education piece through an educated mail pieces and digitally, and also social pressure mail pieces. A social pressure mail piece is a mail piece that say, Kimberly, we see that you voted 2 out of the last 4 elections, but your neighbor voted 4 out of the last 4 elections. Your neighbor has an A, you have a B or C, a C plus, but we want to get you to a B. And so that is what we call a social pressure mail piece that have been proven to increase turnout approximately 10%. And so we want to exercise those particular methods, as well as the targeted effort of the relational organizing of having, and not just at a county level, but a community and city level, where a close-knit community of people making calls to individuals in their community, talking to them about the importance of voting in the upcoming election. And I think in doing that, that is I think is a path, and it certainly gives us an advantage moving into the fall. And then those individuals that are elderly, or tying it to broad testing, anyone that's maybe in a high risk category, we will certainly start looking at ways to encourage them to request a absent and absentee ballot, but also we'll have the create an opportunity, because one of the things I've heard in a county in the southern part of the state was a lady reached out to me via Facebook and said that she can't get an absentee ballot because she don't have a way to make a copy of her ID because everything is closed. And she's in a rural community that don't really have a print shop, and she don't have a printer. And so we're trying to find ways to reduce those type of barriers. That voting is one thing, but then if I don't have access to making a copy of my ID, and there's no digital way to make a request for an absentee ballot, then that's very difficult. So we want to be able to fill that gap in as well. And so it's going to cost a lot of money to do that, but that's why we're focusing a lot of our attention on fundraising for those type of activities.
Well, best of luck to you. You certainly have your work cut out for you in terms of the voter registration and education. We have one final question in our chat, and so I will ask this question now and then give you an opportunity for some closing remarks.
All right.
Do you have any books or resources you recommend for allies so that we can continue to educate ourselves?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. I think that there's a book written by someone in the Bay Area that I think is a very strong book, and that describes the strategy that I'm referring to about touching people that don't vote in every election. It's written by Steve Phillips. It's called Brown is the New Black, is the New White. Brown is the New White. That particular book talks deeply about some of the Southern politics and things that of touching those voters that are already, if they get to the polls, they're going to vote for the most progressive candidate. But the goal is getting those individuals excited enough and talking about issues that impact them. Oftentimes we talk about issues that are safe issues, but there are issues that impact a lot of communities of color that in many instances when we're running our campaigns, we fail to actually acknowledge or have a conversation about. And so that's something that I would encourage. And of course, I have to make a plug for my friend Brian Stevenson, and many of you have seen the movie, but I've also read the book, Just Mercy. And so I think that that's something else that I would encourage. But certainly the book written by Steve Phillips is a really good book, and he's a great resource, great friend, and someone that lives in your state and who gets it. And he not only talked the talk, but he also walks the walk. And so it's very fortunate to have people like him involved in politics nationally.
Well, thank you for both of those recommendations. I was taking notes because I like to read, and so I will definitely add that book. I have Just Mercy, but I don't have the book you just cited, so I will take that as a note and get a copy. Well, we want to say thank you. I want to say thank you on behalf of the Pacific Council on International Policy. We know you're a very busy state leader in Alabama, in fact, national leader. I've seen you traveling across the country. Seen you a couple of times here in California on different visits. And so I do wish you well, and thank you for sharing your insights on poverty and education, healthcare, the COVID crisis, international relations. We've really touched on a lot of different topics, and you've given us some food for thought as we enter our lunch hour. So thank you again, and we wish you well, and we just want to say keep doing the good work that you're doing on behalf of all of Alabama's residents. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.